Want a chance to win a Spring Creek Model Train's 25th anniversary car? Sign up for their newsletter before December 15th for your chance to win each week. The Spring Creek Model Train's newsletter includes new product announcements, pre-order information, specials, coupons, and more. With drawings held each week, the sooner you sign up, the more chances you have to win. Head to the bottom of the homepage at springcreekmodeltrains.com and sign up for your chance to win. If you own a protothrottle, it's time to upgrade your fascia with TullyModels.com fascia protothrottle holders. Experience safe, one-handed operation of your protothrottle and easily shift from engineer to conductor in a snap. With 4 available configurations to choose from, including integrated cup and pick stick holders, Tully Models has a holder for you. Don't have a protothrottle? No problem. TullyModels.com has fascia holders for Digitrax and NCE throttles and holders for your smartphone too. Check out the entire lineup at TullyModels.com. Fast forward into the future or bring a touch of the past to your layout with Rapido GP20 tank cars from Home Shops. Deliver clean and safe water to areas in critical need, just like the prototype with water-trained tank cars. These models represent a new, innovative solution to help solve water shortages across North America. Also available from Home Shops, Gargle Oil GP20 tank cars. This industry was a cornerstone of Frank Ellison's Delta lines, and these cars feature a classic 1970s look that pays tribute to the legacy of this inspiring freelance layout. Learn more about these cars and see the entire Home Shops catalog at homeshops.net. His amazing weathering and graffiti work has set social media ablaze, and now you'll get to hear from the artist himself. Join us for Around the Layout podcast live on Sunday, November 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern, when our guest will be Mike Correa. Mike will share how he brings ultra realism to his models and answers your questions live. Head to atlplive.com to subscribe and to be notified of this and all upcoming Around the Layout podcast live episodes. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. It's time, once again, for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and it just wouldn't be the right title of the show without the man himself, Don Irace. Don, good to see you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Glad to be here.
Good to see you. And talking about ops, you've been doing quite a bit of ops. I've been seeing some updates from your train shed there in Sebastian, Florida. You got Dad down there. I've seen John Farrington. I've seen Vinny Glockley. I've seen Jeff Hankey in the pictures. I've seen a whole bunch of folk, and you've been running some ops sessions down there, which is a good thing.
Yeah, we've been starting up again. The guys, some of the snowbird guys are coming back, this time of the year. So we've been going again. And then me and my father, we've been here pounding the rails like every day for the last month and a half. Like we've probably maybe done like 5 op sessions a week, and it's crazy. But he's getting his fill of running trains, that's for sure.
We were talking before the show, and you mentioned one of the things has been running out of printer paper because you've been printing all those switch lists and just running.
Yeah, my wife is saying, she goes, "What's all the paper you've been printing?" She says, "They're always printing stuff like a couple of times a day." I'm like, "Oh, we're going through the op session so fast that I got to print new switch lists up." So that's what the paper's flying.
Paper's flying, and the railroad's out there making that fantasy money as it moves traffic, and so cool. I do admire the relationship you and your dad have, and so great that he's been able to come down to Florida. And how old is Dad?
Dad is 92. He's 92 years old, and he operates. I mean, he's got a few little issues, but he does a good job. I mean, he doesn't. I mean, I just leave him alone. I'm doing my thing. He's doing his thing, and the only time there's a problem was when I hear click, 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 click. When it sounds like something's not right. And he ran. Sometimes he misses a turnout. He runs through it, and it's okay. He's Dad.
He's Dad, and yeah, that's for sure. But it was so great that you're able to spend time with him down there in Florida and run trains with him and have that ops experience. And speaking of ops experience, You brought along a guest tonight that you had an ops experience with out on Long Island. Tell us about our guest before we bring him in, Don.
Yeah, we have Lou DiRosso. Is that it? Did I get it right? He's
DiRosso, yeah.
DiRosso. I met him at Island Ops this past summer, and he has a beautiful Conrail layout that we operated on. We had a great time, and we just want to. He's only got a few op sessions under his belt. And we just want to get his insight on, how he got to that point, and what he's learned from these few op sessions he's had, and how he's going to go forward from here.
Well, everybody's got to start somewhere, so that'll be a great conversation, and great to have you here, Lou. So welcome to the show.
Hey, Ray. Hey, Don. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, glad to have you here, and really looking forward to hearing this story about your Conrail layout, and then obviously your participation in op sessions and building up to operations as we've been talking about. Well, let's start just getting to know you a little bit and know your layout. Talk about how you got started with your current layout, because as I understand it, ops wasn't really in the picture, was it?
No. So I started construction on my layout in 2019. I model Conrail's Boston Line. And on my layout, it goes from the state line of New York and Massachusetts all the way out to Palmer, Massachusetts. And I had known when I started building the layout that I wanted to build this section of railroad under Conrail. Kind of goes back to when I was a kid and rail fanning trackside and spending time with my father, the way that Don spends time with his now. And when I started construction, I just wanted to run trains. I had always been kind of a running train modeler. When I was a kid, down at my local train club, I was into the operations there, but I just wanted to run trains, right? I just wanted to build a 100-car freight train and run it around the layout. And the idea of operations I never really took it into consideration, because to me, it's just about running trains. So when I started my layout in 2019, I just wanted to run Conrail trains.
Talk about the construction of that layout. What do we have for a foundation now based on what you were building starting in 2019?
So I had started construction in 2019, and I planned out the basement. We actually finished the basement of the house, and I sectioned off roughly a third of the basement. That's all my wife would allow me to have. I drew up the plans, and when the contractor was building the basement and finishing it, I had finished it a certain way so that the layout was in a room, but also part of the rest of the basement, because I knew that I wanted to show off the layout, but I also wanted it to have its own space. So half the layout is sort of behind a wall in its own room, and the other half of the layout is visible through half walls that are finished in, and I put like a bar top on top of the half wall, so that as a guest you can kind of hang out and watch the layout while still being in the rest of the basement and sort of the lounge area, but the layout still has its own space. The contractor thought I was crazy. He's like, you're putting in half walls, and one of the walls is on a 45-degree angle. You'd have to see the plan to really sort of make sense, but yeah, it worked out great, and I started construction. It's a 3-level, 3-deck layout. The layout's essentially a giant dog bone, right? So there's a reversing section on the bottom on one side, and then a double track continuous layout all the way up to the 3rd level, where it then dog bones back on itself again. So it's a continuous loop. Even though it's a double track main line, it's one single track that kind of goes down into the dog bone and comes back. And I designed it that way on purpose, because when I was building the railroad in 2019, I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old boy. And I knew that once trains started running on the railroad, that my kids would be part of it. And something like a single track railroad or even passing sidings what 5-year-old wants to sit and wait on a passing siding?
Mm.
So I designed it as a double track railroad. And in fairness, Conrail's Boston Line was, for the most part, a double track railroad. There were some sections a single track, but I wanted that continuous run so that, we could just run trains. There'd be no stress, no pressure. The railroad has 2 yards, one in West Springfield, which is kind of like the main yard, and then one in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is sort of a feeder yard for the Pioneer Valley. And Don, did the P&W come into Pittsfield or no?
I don't think so.
No,
No.
that would be the
Yeah, that'd be
Housatonic Railroad.
Housatonic.
Oh,
Yeah.
Housatonic,
Yeah,
right, all right, the
yeah.
Housatonic, sure. So there's 2 yards to sort of play with. There's a couple online industries. There's an industrial area. There's a place for tank cars with the offloading and the onloading. But I wanted the industries there just in case I wanted to bring a boxcar or a hopper somewhere. I had a place for it to go. And I completed the initial layout, the track plan and the running. I was up and running probably by 2021, 2022. Shortly after, I realized it's not big enough, and I expanded to actually the 3rd level, which came right around 2022 or 2023. So I expanded for the 3rd level, and then I had my full layout that I'm operating on now.
What's that yacht? It's on the upper level at the top. Is that a yacht up there, or just staging for you?
The staging, yeah, up at the top is State Line. That's sort of the stage. It's a 4-track staging area.
Okay, all right.
It never was a staging area. It was just, when I was playing trains, it was just a place to park trains.
Right.
It never really became a staging area until sort of the operations began to develop. And then the layout actually started to kind of take on its own life in a way, where we had to find sort of places to stage trains and places for trains to go and places for trains to come from. Because Conrail's Boston Line is essentially a through route. There's not a lot of online industry. There's not a lot of transfer. It's mostly just running tonnage from one side of the railroad to the other. And that's what I wanted to do. I just want to move. I just want to move trains across my railroad. That's what makes me happy.
It sounds to me like what you may have accidentally done. That's kind of interesting that you didn't have plans for operations, but you did pick a prototype and you kind of followed a prototype that helped kind of lay a foundation without you really even kind of knowing it. You talk about you had already built-in yards. You had this accidental staging. It wasn't really the operation staging, but you had to have a place to park trains that would turn into staging. And then you were even kind of dabbling with industry. So you must have had kind of an inkling that something more could potentially happen, didn't you?
I mean, I wasn't planning. Had I known now, right, what I knew then, I certainly could have planned it better. But as the layout grew, it kind of really took on a life of its own, and it started to go in a direction towards operations. And before I even started with official operations, it was me and my 2 boys operating trains. Maybe my son's taking a train out of West Springfield Yard, and maybe my other son's working in industry, and dad's yelling at him to stop touching things. But it sort of developed, really did develop a life of its own, and it was kind of it's been neat to watch the progression.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, what you are doing was, when I was there operating, I think it was fantastic. Everything, everything ran well. What you did was good. How did you end up like adding some switching industries in there, being that Conrail is really a point to point kind of route on that level?
So the layout, I'm trying to keep the layout as prototypical as possible. So
Mhm.
all of the locations on the layout, I'm trying to model with a little bit of modeler's license, but I'm trying to model it as close to it was in real life. And one of the switching areas on the layout is Westfield, Massachusetts, which in real life, Conrail did have some online industry in Westfield. And I have Pittsfield Yard, because that was also a part of Conrail's operations in Pittsfield. They had the transfer yard. So as I built the layout, I knew that I wanted to model these scenes. Westfield, especially because there's a really cool spot where the tracks come over one of the state highways on a very sort of iconic bridge with very New England type buildings right behind the bridge, which I've I've modeled pretty well, in my opinion. So I knew that that scene was going to be on the railroad in some capacity, and also just finding space too. You can't just have mountains and trees everywhere. I wanted to have as many tracks really as I could because I wanted to run trains.
Right. So how many online industries do you have on the layout?
I have the Westfield industrial area has four industries. There's a salt transload, which is there in real life. There's a lumber mill or a lumber yard, where center beams go in and out. There's a two other industries there for boxcars, which are fictional. I really wanted to try and model. It was called Trap Rock, and it was a big mine where they mined and built or created ballast for the railroad, and they would bring unit ballast trains out of this industry, 50, 60, 70 cars long, and dump ballast on the rest of the railroad, even off the Boston line. But I just didn't have the space for it, unfortunately. But the idea is there, so the industry was there, so I knew that that was going to be part of the railroad. And then there's another tank car industry with two tracks for tank cars, with all the piping and that sort of thing. And then there's one or two just single track little industries, nothing special. But that's it's a pretty good, in my opinion. At least a decent representation of the small online industry that Conrail did have on the Boston line.
I want to take a step back and ask, where did you learn all of this about Conrail's Boston line, where you were able to gather all this information on their operations?
Well, I was always I was always into Conrail, and as a kid, my father would take me rail fanning, and we would go all over. But one of the places that we would go to from Long Island was the Boston line, because it was one of the closer sort of class one. If you went up there, you were guaranteed to see some action. There was the River Line in New Jersey and like the Hudson Valley, and then there was the Boston Line. Those were kind of the two big railroads, and there's something sort of magical about the mountains and the Berkshires in particular. Just just beautiful everywhere you look. It's just nice. The mountains, the trees, the rivers, and I've always had an appreciation for New England with the architecture, the brickwork, the way that they build railroads through the mountains and over bridges. So it was always something that interested me. And when it came time to build my own railroad, I had a collection of Conrail locomotives and rolling stock from when I was younger that my father had built for me over the years and I had collected over the years. So I knew I was going to build a Conrail layout, but I also had a collection of Amtrak. So I knew that I wanted to incorporate Amtrak into my railroad as well. So I kind of had to pick something that had Conrail and Amtrak. And I initially had flirted with Conrail's like horseshoe curve through Pennsylvania and Altoona and all that, but the scale was just too big. It was
Yeah.
I just didn't have the space, and if you're going to do something like that, you want to do it right. And the Boston line just felt right. And I started with the research. I liked the fact that it was a through railroad. It kind of went from point A to point B. It was very, very clean, very easy, and started with the research, looking at the yards and where the tracks go and so on. And you kind of learn quickly if you're into it. The knowledge is out there, right? You just have to kind of read about it, and it's really not that complicated of a railroad, to be honest. So it kind of just came easy.
Did you use any Google Earth stuff to kind of see where these tracks went and how they were lined?
So you could definitely Google Earth is a fantastic tool, but I model roughly 1990, which is, hard to believe, 35 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
So a lot,
Yep.
a lot has changed as far as what you're looking at, but the right of way and most of the infrastructures pretty much remain the same. So,
Mhm.
Google Earth, obviously historical photographs. Conrail Historical Society has a ton of literature that's publicly available. So every scene I try to find, photos from the 80s and the 90s, and that's sort of the inspiration for modeling each scene is, what you saw in real life.
Right. So when you get into Palmer, Mass, do you do any interchange with the New England Central down there, which is now the G&W?
Yep.
Well,
So
back
I
then it would have
modeled.
been Central Vermont, right?
Oh yeah,
It
right.
was
Back
Central
then, yeah.
Vermont,
Yeah.
and then it went into New England Central, and who's the other one? Massachusetts Central, I
Mass
think.
Coastal? Is it
Mass
Mass
Central,
Central? Yeah,
Massachusetts
No,
Mass
Mass
Central was,
Central.
Central.
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
Mass Central was cool. I haven't started modeling yet, but it's cool because they had a very eclectic collection of early EMDs. If you recall, they had the painted Alaska F7 with like the gigantic snowplow on the front, and they had like a rebuilt. I think it was like an RS3 with an EMD prime mover in it. I could be wrong. I could be making this up, but they had like a
No,
really
no, no.
cool collection of
No,
stuff. They had
I
like a
think I think
CF7
you're
for a
pretty
while.
accurate
Yeah.
on it. Yeah. Yeah.
I gotta keep remembering that I'm like a present day model and you're modeling back.
Yeah.
And I gotta keep
Yeah,
that in
yeah,
my head
yeah.
when I'm asking questions because of like, no, you wouldn't be modeling in New England Central because it didn't exist back then.
I think New England Central came in '96. I think New England Central took
Mm,
over in '96 was the transition from Central Vermont to New England Central. So I
all
actually
right,
have both on the railroad in my interchange area.
cool.
Yeah, it could have
Nice.
been 94, 95, somewhere because I think they were 1995 Short Line Railroad of the Year used to be the cursive
Oh, you're
on
right. That's
the
what's written on
locomotive stuff.
script.
Right. So I think they had at least a year before they won that award. But now going back to that one and just including that thought, you've really picked a great prototype for operations just on interchange alone. I mean, we just
Yeah.
named a bunch of railroads, right?
Yeah.
Mass Central, New England Central / Central Vermont. You have Housatonic. You got so many awesome tie-ins. So again, through all this information you gather through your love of the Boston line and then your research thereafter, and maybe accidental, not accidental, you picked a great railroad to build into operations. Earlier on, you kept talking about how your railroad started to take a life of its own. Talk
Yeah,
about what
sure.
was going on there and how does that start to lead to this idea, hey, I can do more than just spectate this thing. I can actually put this railroad to work.
So in roughly about the beginning of 2024, maybe late 2023, a group of modelers and layout hosts on Long Island. The group is called Island Ops, and it's a group of railroads from all over Long Island who host or have an open house for guests who come from all over the country, and they do it once a year for a whole weekend, and it's a great time. And I had heard about it. I had spectated once or twice over the years, and the guys who run the show are close personal friends of mine who have been over my house, run on the layout, informally, sort of over the years as the layout was developing. And I had developed my own signal system somewhere around 2023. And once the signals were running, and it really started to feel like a railroad. Wasn't just wasn't just running trains in circles. It was starting to feel like a real railroad. And the guys from Island Ops approached me and said, hey, we think that your railroad can sort of grow into something that you can host and start operating sessions. And I said, oh, okay. And it was something that I had never really given much thought into, because up until that point, it was me running trains with my kids, or me running trains, with just a couple guys and hanging out on a Friday night, having a few beers and making fun of each other. So the thought of operations was exciting, but scary because there's a lot that goes into it that somebody who's not into it has to figure out.
No
And
pressure,
for
right?
me, it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of time. It was a lot of time because the last thing I want to do as a host, somebody who's, showing off years and years of hard work and passion and love and research and is to show it off to a group of strangers and to end up looking like an idiot, or it doesn't work, or nobody's having fun because everybody's crashing into each other. So there was a lot of preparation that had gone into especially the beginning stages, and even still now, because I'm 2.5 years into quote unquote operations, and I'm still printing out new car cards or train cards, for operators, and it's a lot. But in the beginning, it's especially a lot because I had no plan for my layout. And as you guys know, I mean, you have to have a plan for operations.
Mhm.
You can't just show up and, start pointing fingers at each other and say, do this or do that. You
Do what
have
you
to have
want.
yeah, you got to know, right? Exactly. I mean, you got to have a plan, and it's a lot of work to develop a plan.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but you did it. You know what I mean? And you took initiative and set things up. How much help would you get from the guys on the island, to get you going with this?
So they certainly helped with the knowledge, right? Because they, like you guys, have been doing this for decades and decades. So with the knowledge comes Ray's like,
I have.
you know, yeah, Don's
That
the
guy,
grand
yeah, that guy
poobah
has, but
of
I
operations.
fit
Yeah.
I
that's right.
fit that bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, the nice thing about my railroad in particular is, Ray, kind of what you were saying, without even knowing it, it's a good basis for operations because of the way that it's designed in real life and the way that I've tried to portray as accurately to the prototype as possible. So a plan for operations sort of came naturally because I I'll be honest, there was one night when I was sitting there trying to figure out, oh, where are these trains going to go? What are they going to do? And I said, well, I mean, I model prototypical railroad. Let me go look up and see what the real trains did, and why can't I just do that? So I did.
Right.
Yeah, nothing wrong with looking at the prototype to figure that out.
That's a good place to go.
And I'll grab, I print out like little cards for each train, essentially, as a job gets bid out to an operator. I give them a little card with the train name, and then, like a general description of where it starts, where it's going, what you're doing, and where it's terminating. So I just kept to the prototypical trains. And, I'm looking at a card right now because I just had a couple guys over the other night, and train SENE, which is Selkirk to New England. I'll just follow what it does in real life. And just like it does in real life, it goes from Selkirk, which on my layout is roughly state line staging because that's
Right.
the furthest point west on the railroad. Well, SENE comes from Selkirk, and its first stop is West Springfield Yard. I have West Springfield Yard, so we can do that. So that train goes into West Springfield. It makes a pickup, it makes a drop off, and then from there it keeps going east to New England, which eventually gets handed off to, I believe it's Guilford. But on my railroad, the furthest point east is Palmer. So after West Springfield, it just goes to Palmer, and that's where it terminates.
Right.
So, by sticking to the prototype, it definitely helped. It took the creativity out of it and made it a lot more manageable about what we could do.
It's good because it's a class ones are nice because you can have a mix of through freights and switching jobs to get like doing a region like I do. There's no really through freights. It's all switching. You got some interchange trains that run from Worcester up to Valley Falls. they swap out cars and then they come back, and it's that's the difference between like where you can have a nice mix of everything. So and it's easy to keep some guys happy because a lot of guys they just want to run a through train and they don't want to stop at any odds to really switch anything. They just want to run through from one end of the layout to the other. Then you got guys that just want to switch. So you got a good selection and able to keep both those kind of people happy on your layout.
Yeah. I had 4 friends over Thursday night for an op session because I had, changed a couple things around, and I'm trying to incorporate West Springfield Yard more into the operations. Now there's a yard master who's stationed there, and I'm trying to keep, the yard activity moving throughout
Mhm.
the evening. And when it came time to bid out the jobs, everybody jumps on the road trains. Everybody wants to take, TV6, which is the hot intermodal, or, ML 482, which is a solid auto rack train. They don't make any stops. They go from one side of the layout to the other, and guys do it with a smile on their face. And when it came time to bid out the local, everybody looked at each other and started pointing fingers at each other because nobody wanted to run the local.
Well, I
And
mean,
that's the third session in a row where the local hasn't come out. So,
right. So now this is where the point in your operating scenario where you have to kind of lay a law down. So you would have so at the beginning you could have a couple of trains go out through trains, but then the next jobs of bid are going to be switches. You know what I mean? Because you
right.
have to force you yourself as a host are going to force those switching jobs into your operation session because it's a part of it. You know what I mean? You can't say, well, we're just going
Yeah,
to run
for sure.
through trains all night long and not do switching because really the layout is what does the layout do? The layout has through freights. It has through freights to switch, stop and switch and drop and pick up cars and yards, and they have switching jobs they got to do. In order for the railroad to function, these cars are going to be moved around so they eventually get back to where they started so they can start the cycle all over again. You know what I mean? So as a host, you have to push that.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the hard things about developing the operations, especially in the beginning, is trying to figure out how the locals sort of jive with the run throughs and when to send out this train so that it doesn't block that train, and when to send out the local. You can't send out the local in front of, Amtrak. You
Right.
can't send out a local in front of your highest priority intermodal trains. And that was something that I sort of struggled with because I never really thought of all this stuff. And in real life, Conrail didn't have a schedule per se. They ran trains as needed, and they were frequent and daily, but there's no timetable with freight trains. They kind of go when they go and they come when they come.
Right.
So that was something,
Yeah.
and I'm still working. I'm still trying to figure out, the timing for operations so that things flow as good as they can.
But what I love is what you did is you started simplistic. And I think that's a great reminder that operations don't have to be difficult to start. You don't have to start laying it down as, okay, the first time or the second or third or fourth time we operate this, it has to be wildly difficult. You lay down that foundation like you did. You took the information from the prototype, you built the trains based along that and what fit, and then started to add in as you went along. And I think that's a great way to kind of do this down. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. The same thing with establishing your operations, right? A little bit at a time.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to see what works and what doesn't. And one of the things actually, Don, it may have been you who had given me the recommendation when you were here for Island Ops, was to sort of create a list for the members and say what worked and what didn't work.
Right.
What did you enjoy and what was, not enjoyable? And that's something that is nice as an owner, because then you can go back after the fact when all the stress is over and all the excitement's over, and then you can sit down and say, oh, okay, I didn't realize that the local took, 3.5 hours of a 4-hour session, because maybe the guy running the local, as much as he likes switching, well, maybe he, wanted to switch for an hour and a half. And then he wanted to run, some sort of through train or a transfer or something like that. So it's nice to have the feedback, which was a great idea that I got from you guys.
Do you operate your own trains? Like when nobody's there? If you're going through all your jobs, what I'm thinking is that like, if I had that situation, I would like grab your dad, grab your son, let one of them run a through train around, and while you are doing a switching job, to see how these trains meet each other and how you can get through trains around. You got a double track main lines. You should be able to figure out some way to get through trains by the switching guy. You know what I mean? Just, on your own without an op session to try to get a feel for where these trains can run and where they can't run. And as far as Amtrak goes, the class ones didn't care about Amtrak anyway. They did everything in their power to delay them. So doesn't matter.
Yeah, we run the Lakeshore here, but it's called Late for Sure.
Yeah. Amtrak's never been on time.
No, no. I've tried, and I'll be honest. My kids are now 10 and 8, and when we started this interview, I literally just came off the baseball field from a baseball game. So, the time that I have to dedicate to this is unfortunately not as much as I wish I did.
Right.
So when we're going over the ops, it's more of a trial by fire, not a lot of not a lot of practice.
And what Don's talking about is really all part of the learning process. And I want to go back to your learning process prior to even Island Ops 2024. You had the Island Ops guys, maybe selfishly, because they were looking for another layout to add to Island Ops, right? And they convinced you to do it, right? Talk about the learning process and your preparation up even to Island Ops 24 and making sure that you felt that your layout was at least mostly ready for that first opportunity to have people coming in to operate it.
So one of the first major obstacles that I realized I had was power. You have to have enough power on your railroad to have, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 operators. And my railroad is NCE, and up until Island Ops, or the preparation of Island Ops, I had been running my railroad with the sort of the basic 5 amp command station from NCE. And it wasn't until the first time I had 4 operators on the railroad that I realized that we were maxing out the booster. And that was a shock, because I had thought, I got plenty of these 5 amps, is plenty of power. Well, not when 4 guys are running 3 sound engines each, and there's another, 10 engines idling away in various parts of the railroad. So very quickly, I realized that I needed to, upgrade my capacity and my power. And then along with that comes a whole host of troubleshooting and, then isolating the railroad into power districts, trying to match the power districts between, the different boosters. And that was sort of a shock to the system initially. And my railroad also has fully functioning signal system, which to me is, I think, my greatest achievement. And I think functioning signals is what sets a railroad apart from just a train set, because you can have the nicest scenery, and if you're modeling, like I do in 1990, I mean, the signals is what really makes it feel like a railroad. And everybody knows, what it feels like to be sitting at a red signal watching other trains go by. And it's a feeling that you just can't replicate, without them. So along with that comes a whole nother host of troubleshooting and, double checking and going through the motions with that. So it was a lot. It was a lot of work in the beginning. It was way more work than I thought it was going to be, but it's totally worth it.
How'd you overcome it?
Trial and error. So I have a YouTube channel, shameless plug. It's Conrail's Boston Line HO scale. And I actually started the YouTube channel making videos for myself and for other guys like me who were going through the process of, building, expanding, and then more importantly, the signals. Because signaling today, there's no NMRA standard for signals. So Atlas has a signal product. Railroad Circuits has a signal product. Digitrack, everybody has NCE, everybody has a signal product, but none of them communicate or work with each other. So there's a lot of trial and error when you're trying to create an accurate signal system to your railroad, because on my railroad, there's G types, which are commercially available through Atlas, but the Atlas signals are common anode. And I had custom signals made because there's also three-headed G types and dwarf signals and everything else. And those are all common cathode. So you have to find, products that can sort of communicate with both of them. And that was a lot of work. And everything's run through JMRI Panel Pro. And I wanted the signal aspects to be as accurate as possible to real life. And that's a whole another level of trial and error and communication. And the first Island Ops that I was part of was 2023. I'm sorry, 2024. Don was here in 2025, right?
25, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so it was 2024. And about a month before, I was rocking and rolling. I knew my power was good. I was up to, I think, 15 amps of power distributed equally around the railroad, and things were running smooth. I had done one or two mock sessions just to know that trains were running. There was no derailments. There was no shorts. There was no, no power issues. The signal system was working great. And I looked at the guest list, and one of the guests was a gentleman from like the Chicago area who worked for BNSF for the railroad, and he was a signal maintainer. And I sat here and I said, this guy is coming all the way from Chicago to run trains on my railroad. I need to make sure that this, not only do the signals work, because this guy, works on them in real life, I got to make sure that they're accurate. And I want to make sure that there's also, I call them advanced aspects, like an approach medium or an approach limited, something that tells you something else is coming down the line, because that's what they are in real life. And if this guy's coming all the way from Chicago, I at least want him to, sort of enjoy himself. So I'd gone back and I rewrote countless hours of code and logics so that I could then have advanced signals, so that if you have a medium aspect coming up in Pittsfield, well, the signal before that's going to tell you that you have an approach medium. Or, if you had a restricting, then the signal before that's going to be an approach. And that's what slows the train down as it, goes throughout the railroad. And I wanted it to be as prototypical as possible. And that was a lot of work too, on top of everything, on everything else.
Again, no pressure.
Yeah, none.
Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot of pressure on yourself, especially for being your first big operating session. So let's talk about the operating session itself. How did it go? I mean, this guy from Chicago, was he satisfied?
Yeah, I don't even think he thought twice about it. He just started running trains.
To play.
He just,
he had to run trains.
Yeah, he didn't say anything bad. So, I'll take that as a win, I guess. But no, there's always little things, right? You're always going to have a short. You're always going to have an issue with, there's some Wi-Fi thing. I use panel tablets as panels in two of the yards. And, there's always, your Wi-Fi is always going to crash as soon as somebody comes to your house, or there's going to be some short that develops that had never, ever happened until, 4 people show up to run trains at your place.
Hey, Don, you've been working on a study on that, right? Carbon dioxide and its effect on railroads. It seems like as soon as people show up and start breathing on it, it all goes to heck, doesn't it?
It's unbelievable. When a door opens up, you have to stand there and watch it, make sure the gremlins ain't crawling in underneath it. Because it really is. Even in all the years I've been operating, every now and then, it's like one of them nights come along, like, something, we're just going to shut the switch off and go home, because even here on this layout, I've had it like probably a couple of times where things are just not, for some reason, just not working the way they're supposed to, and it just frustrates me to death. And I don't even want to. I just want to stop and go and just reboot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And Don, if you recall, when you were here, within the first 5 minutes of you guys getting out there and getting going, every single block indication on my railroad lit up, and every signal locked, and
Yep.
everybody lost control of their trains all at the same time. And we had, 4 runaway trains with the
Yep.
entire railroad basically locked out, and my Wi-Fi crashed at the same time, which was completely unrelated. So,
But you
you know,
rebooted, you rebooted and recovered, and it was fine. The whole op session went off without a hitch. I
yeah,
mean,
well,
it
that's
is what
exactly
it
it.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you recovered, and that's all that counts. So, what were the changes that you made between Island Ops 24 and Island Ops 25?
I would say that as I began to operate, I learned a lot from 24, and I really started to focus on the different trains and trying to get a flow for the trains on the railroad, where they come from, where they stop, and where they end up. And one of the things that I developed during 24 for the first Island Ops was a dedicated staging yard at the very top of the railroad and a dedicated staging yard at the very bottom of the railroad. And it created a very natural sort of point A to point B. And I actually took the inspiration from Dave Abelys, if you've ever operated or watched his channel on Conrail's Onondaga cutoff. One of the greatest things about his railroad is his trains come into staging and come out of staging in the same place, but becomes a different train because once it goes into staging, it's kind of gone. And then once it comes out of staging, it's kind of reappears as a new train. So you can have the same power, same engines, the same train, the same consist with a new crew, and it now is a new train that is now, venturing down your railroad. And that, to me, for my railroad on a sort of a point to point mainline operation, made things significantly easier and more fluid, because you don't have to break down a train at the end of its run every single time. And you don't need a gigantic, freight yard or classification yard, because I don't have the space for something, something
Mhm.
big, a 12, 15, yard tracks. And so that added to the flow was creating that upper staging yard as sort of a beginning, and then a lower staging yard as sort of the end, and then reversing it. So an operator could take a train from the upper staging all the way down to the lower staging, and then he's done. And then a new crew comes on and can take that same train, even if that train does nothing but just go back up to where it came from.
Mhm.
It's a new crew, it's a new train, it's different, and it's not just, it's not just running trains in circles. It actually has a purpose. It's going somewhere. It's doing something that's accurate.
So basically, you got your trains. Your two trains are self-staging. They leave staging, they go into staging, they come out of staging, back up to staging, and you never have to turn the power and reverse it, put it on the other end. So it
Right.
saves you a lot of
Yep.
setup between sessions to do it that way. Plus, you can run more through trains that way, which is good, especially if you got a dispatcher.
And if you have the space for, 20, 30 staging tracks, which, some guys have probably more than
Mhm.
that, then it's not necessary, because you have the room to stage everything. But, I only have so much space to work with.
Right.
And that was, because before then we would just run trains basically in circles, and I would try to cram things into West Springfield Yard, try to create and break down, and it just, it just wasn't working. And it was Island Ops, the first Island Ops, that really brought it to light how something so simple, the answer was right in front of me. I just never thought of it, because I didn't have a reason to think about it, really. I was just down here playing trains with my kids.
All right. So after that session in 2025, what new improvements you made between then and now? Because you did in the beginning, we were talking, showed me some stuff that you were doing. So why don't you explain that?
So after our session, and by the way, the difference between 24 and 25 was also the members who were here, because the first group that I had in 24 weren't necessarily operators like Don, like you and Mark, guys that have been doing this for a long time and have the knowledge that you guys do. And so that was a big change too, was learning from you guys what I can do and what I shouldn't do. I had never thought that I could give a job as a yard master to somebody for 4 hours, and all they would do is move stuff around the yard and kind of boss people around, in and out of their yard space, and they would be completely content and happy to do that for 4 hours.
Yep.
It never dawned on me. So
people love to work in yards.
they love it. Now we don't have car cards here yet because I'm just not at that, I'm not at that level of detail for the operations. But you can easily tell somebody to drop 10 cars off and pick 10 cars up, and people are happy doing it. And then it also creates a lot of, so I call it busy work on the railroad, and then that sort of spirals into the locals too. I had never thought of running a local. I don't know. I just never thought of it. When I started with the industries, I just, whatever train I was running, I would stop here and pick up a couple cars and drop off a car, and never thought to make it like a real job. And then I had a local guy who loves locals, and he has a railroad, that's strictly locals. The entire railroad is one big local. And I put him on a local here and said, just run it and tell me what you think. And he did. He ran it. It took him 3.5 hours. And he was like, hey, this is great.
Yeah, good.
I said, 3.5 hours. You went nowhere. He's like, yeah.
I think the best tool that you have right now, Lou, is that you're not afraid to ask those questions. That makes a world of difference. That it's okay to admit that you don't know and ask those that do and take their feedback. That's huge. And that means a lot to operators too. People that visit layouts, when a layout owner asks them their opinion and want to get their feedback and want to make the operations better for everybody's enjoyment, that means a whole lot. And I know that means a lot to Don and Mark and everybody else as well, to be able to help in those situations.
Oh yeah, no, it's been fantastic. It really does help, because the knowledge that you guys have is the experience. You know what works, what doesn't work, and then you also get a feel for it too. You could come to my railroad, which you've never seen before, and within 10 or 15 minutes, because of your experience, you can get a feel for what works and what doesn't work, and what I should do and what I should stop doing, and and it really is helpful.
So when I was there, you didn't have like much in like paperwork or switch lists or stuff like that. So what have you done with that?
So I started with train cards now. Any train that's not just a point and shoot, going from state line staging to Palmer staging. Any train that has, a little bit of hair on it, whether there's some switching or a pickup and a drop off, or West Springfield, I'll put it on the card now so that the operator can read the instructions and see where he has to stop, what he has to pick up. And again, it's loose. It's not, there's no car cards. We're not dropping off specific cars and picking up specific cars. But, it's easy to tell somebody when you go into West Springfield Yard, just drop off 10 cars and pick up 10 cars.
Right.
That's something that anybody could do without technical knowledge, and then without me spending hours, going through the cars and figuring out, what cars where. And
yeah, I mean, I think the only place you'd really need to have switch lists is on your locals. I mean, because if you on the through trains of just stopping in yards and picking up cars and dropping off cars, I mean, like I said, if you're going to pick up 10 cars, you pick up 10 cars and, leave 10 cars. You don't need a switch list for that. But just like for your locals where they're switching industries, then yes, so I mean, it kind of gets you down to where you only need to do something for your locals. If you got 2 or 3, that's all you really need to do. Even car cards is, it's up to you. I was into car cards for my old railroad, but I've gotten rid of the car cards and I've gone to all switch lists now because I mean I don't have any through trains, so everything is a switch list, and it's been a process to make the switch list to get it to the point where a new guy can come in and understand what he's got, And I ask my guys if you don't understand it, give me a suggestion on what I can do to understand it. Whether it's to highlight this car or highlight that car or whatever. But but I still, all the years I've been doing this, I still want operator feedback. Always. I'm always into feedback. I have no problem taking, listen to anybody because maybe after all the years I've been doing this, I might have missed something.
Sure. Yep. And that was one of the great pieces of advice that you and Mark had given me when you were here was the feedback. I had I call it a knock list anytime I have anybody over, and I usually dispatch because, I design the signal system and I kind of know the railroad obviously better than, folks who come over, but I'll have a knock list of problems, so if there's a dead spot or a short or, a piece of rolling stock that's, derailing or something like that, I'll track that throughout the night. But to have the feedback, it's easy to tell somebody, hey, this, the way that this works is, you shouldn't stop here. You should go there instead. That's great. But in the middle of an operating session, when you're on the radio and you're, trying to figure things out, and sometimes it just goes in one ear and out the other. So to have the written feedback like you guys
Right.
did, it's good because then after the fact, you can sit down and sort of digest it and say,
Mhm.
what's this guy talking about? And then you look and you say, oh, maybe he's right.
Tell us about your dispatching part. We haven't even touched on any of that.
So yeah, dispatching is a challenge all to itself, because not only do you have to have knowledge of the railroad, but you also have to have knowledge of, the dispatching and how to do it and what to click and push and what certain symbols mean. So on my railroad is run through JMRI Panel Pro, and I built the signal system using Logix, which is, incorporated in the JMRI. So I have my computer set up, connected to the NCE system, but in the lounge area of the layout room, and that's the dispatcher station. And what I've been doing now is I'll have a road channel with radios for all the road crews, and then I'll have a separate radio on a separate channel that's direct to the yardmaster, so that we could communicate sort of effectively and not everybody's screaming over the radio at the same time.
Right.
And the dispatcher, the way my system is programmed is the whole railroad runs on automatic block, which essentially everything's green until it gives a reason to be yellow or red, whether it's a switch or a train or that sort of thing. And then after Island Ops 24, I decided to go to CTC, which is, I don't want to get into the details of it, but it's more dispatcher controlled, where the dispatcher is actually dictating the signals versus just the signals just telling you what's going on the railroad. And CTC really makes things more fun in an operating session because the dispatcher can control the traffic much more effectively.
You're right. So, like on my railroad, sometimes we run ABS if there's no dispatcher, and then we run CTC, obviously, when there is dispatcher. So, I guess the other thing I'm going to ask is that you ever think about having a remote dispatcher? I got to
I think somebody's looking for a job is what's going on here, just so that
So
everybody's clear on.
I would love to have a remote dispatcher, because I don't really enjoy dispatching. I would rather watch. Yeah. I would rather watch my trains, and I don't even want to operate. I want to sit back and I want to rail fan my railroad. I could let somebody dispatch and everybody else has their jobs, and I just want to sit back. I want to watch the trains go around. I want to listen to the crews, making fun of each other and listen to, everybody having fun. But I want to sit back and enjoy the railroad. So I would love to have, so I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to give you access to it. I think
We can
we'll have
work
to
on that.
figure that out. Yeah.
We can work on
Yeah.
it, buddy. Let me tell you.
I mentioned Dave Avely's with his Onondaga Cutoff. He does virtual dispatching also. And I was watching one of his live streams one time, and he had a guy, I think in Australia, dispatching his railroad from he's in New Jersey.
Was he dispatching or was he actually running the train? I think he does. I think he
Maybe he
does.
was.
Yeah, I think he does remote locomotive control. I don't think he does remote dispatching. He has
Oh, okay, maybe
has guys actually running the trains remotely. That's pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
You know what I mean? We haven't
But
done that over here yet, but
if you watch one of his live streams, he's sitting there and he's rail fanning his railroad.
yeah.
He is sitting back. He is having the time of his life. He's, sitting next to the tracks with a 6-pack of beer, and he's watching the trains go by, and he's telling the audience, about the trains and about the engines and about, and that's where I want to get to on my railroad. That's what I sort of aspire to, is to be a third party enjoyer of the railroad.
So, Lou, back in the beginning of the show, you mentioned that in 2019, you started building this layout with no intentions of really operating it. It was a spectator style layout. And then operations is introduced to you and the idea and the concept is born to the point now. Talk about what that's done for your passion for your layout.
Oh boy. It's created another level of fun. It's another level of research. It's another level of knowledge. It's another level of taking a model, which is really, it's nothing more than just toys that we're playing with, right? But it's taking it to another level. And that to me is special. That to me is fun. It's not just, looking at a toy going around in circles, and it's not just sitting back and appreciating all of your hard work, but it's making it real life. It's making it feel like it's real. That to me is what's made operations special.
Yeah, well said. And I believe in what you have found is purpose. And it's amazing to hear you go from not even really understanding what you did, because you built an awesome foundation right from the beginning, and perhaps without even knowing it, and going to the point where you are now, where not only are you enjoying it, but now you're able to share it with others, including Don, who was able to attend. And I'm sure Don's going to be putting you back on his list for Island Ops 2026, which I'm sure is going to be here before you know it.
Yeah, I'm already preparing. Yep.
Awesome.
So I was glad that I was able to get to your layout. I had a fantastic time with the few little glitches you had in the beginning. Everything worked out well. I can't really wait. I'd love to come back again sometime. Hopefully next year for Island Ops. And thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad to meet you. I'm glad that you were able to come and enjoy my passion, and also give me your knowledge, because it really is, it's very helpful. And if there's something that I could give some advice to, sort of me, somebody who's me, 2 years ago, is don't be scared. Don't be nervous. Don't overthink it like I do. People are coming over to have fun. And that's the name of the game, is fun. And whether your railroad is the biggest, best, perfect railroad that 30 people can come down to and run trains on, or even if your railroad is small and you have enough room for 1 or 2 people to hang out, it's about the fun. And operations really brings the fun out of it, because like I said, it makes it more lifelike. So anybody who's, sort of scared and sort of not looking, not scared of doing it, just invite a couple people over and say, what can we do? Where can we go? How can we make this more real? And see what happens.
That's some great advice, Lou, and we certainly appreciate you coming on and sharing that along with the story of your railroad from spectator to operator and taking that process forward. Thank you so much for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story.
Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, Ray, thank you so much for having me. Don, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout. All right, well, we're wrapping before we're wrapped here. I got one more question here, and then we'll wrap. Okay.
Thank God for editing.